welcome back everyone. It's been a while. It's Morrison here from YWAM Wheeler again, and today we're just gonna share our student testimony with you. Santiago, he's from Mexico and he's doing the SBS right now in Wheeler. And last Friday he came over to my house and he shared his story, and I told him, hey Santiago, you need to come share this in front of the camera.
There you go, how about that?
I think that's great.
Alright, you got it. Look, it's a 1018. Perfect, no?
Mm-hmm.
You should see this beauty. We're definitely gonna use this. Right there. It's not.
Okay, I guess
We can
got
start.
it. You carry everything.
Alright. You want to do these questions and answers, or should I just start speaking? Now, which camera do I? So every time I go outside and I see this farming landscape, I ask myself again, me, a Mexican city boy, how did I end up here? And you know, my story with farmlands goes way back. The first farmland God took me to was a Mexican farmland, and when you see the cows here, the sheep here, this is really fancy farmland, and I mean it, you know? Like, the Mexican farmland is as poor as a place can get. And I was there in that Mexican farmland because I had flunked high school. Yeah, I mean, right now I'm doing the SBS, this big fancy school where you study a lot, but I wasn't always the best student, you know? While I was there in this Mexican farmland, I went there because I have an uncle who's a pastor, and he had this school of pastors, and one of his students, he owned this farmland, and he said, well, if you ever have a boy who needs discipline, you could just simply send him there and we'll take care of him. And that's when my father heard that, he was like, what a great idea! The best thing I can do is totally send my son to a Mexican farmland. So there I was, 15 years old, flunked to a couple of high schools, and didn't get on with this Christian life thing. I needed a discipleship of some sort, and the first man that God used in my life was a man from a ranch called Miguel Aparicio. And Miguel Aparicio was not one of those tender men who, you know, treat people with kindness. Boy, that man could get you on your nerves, you know? That guy, he was just completely crazy. And the first thing I learned was how to milk a cow. And when you milk a cow, you just tie the legs, and then you press... let's just skip that milking cow part. So I learned how to milk cows, and I learned how to kill chickens, and other things that you learn in farmlands, and it was really weird for a city boy, and I started to appreciate what it was to belong to a city where you actually can go to your toilet and flush it, and you don't need to, you know, poo in some weird hole in the middle of nowhere, and well, it's a really disgusting experience, but I started learning, you know, how it was to live in the Mexican farmlands, and God just changed my view of everything. This guy, Don Miguel Aparicio, he was just not the best type, you know, relating, and I did try to escape. And while I was escaping, it was one of those moments, I feel like in a movie, you know, like in a thriller, and the crazy farmer was chasing after me, and I had to go hide somewhere, and I hid in this car. And then I hid in a trailer, and I went with this trailer rider, and we went to the next town. And while we were going on the next town, something awful happened, and we needed to rescue this guy from the middle of a river, and the guy died. You know, I was there with the adrenaline of the escape, and I saw this guy die. It was like completely crazy, and I started getting these questions, you know, what are we living for? What is my goal in this life? And soon afterwards, I left that small Mexican town and I went back to the city, and they were shooting this James Bond movie called Spectre, and I'm a big James Bond fan. So what I did is I went there, me, a 15-year-old kid, and I decided I'm gonna get a job here. So we rent a room in this hotel, and it was completely crazy. Like, the whole production was there. I got to meet Daniel Craig, Sam Mendes, and it was really impossible for a 15-year-old guy to enter into the film production. But what I did is I prayed for the first time, and God heard my prayers for the first time, and I experienced this beautiful miracle that was working in a James Bond movie. I know it was completely mental. I got to see the crazy helicopter fight at the beginning, and I got to see, you know, Daniel Craig dressed as James Bond. And spoiler alert, he's smaller than how he looks like. But anyways, this was one of the greatest experiences and gifts that God gave me, but I still did not get the point. I still did not understand how God's provision worked. So I had to go through a tough process of going in and out of high schools. And during this process, I discovered this passion I have for film. And yeah, it was so beautiful. I started studying film. I did a master's on film studies, especially film history and film theory. So yeah, I know how films work, and I know how films have been done for the last few years, some technical aspects and everything. And you might be wondering, how did a 15-year-old get to do a master's in film? Well, that was the other great miracle God did in my life. I remember I was desperate after being rejected. I tried signing up for film studies, and they rejected my application because I did not have a bachelor's degree. This got me completely desperate, and I decided I'm gonna pray and I'm gonna see if God will help me on this. And you know, God is just so faithful, and He's just so full of mercy. I, being a non-Christian, received this crazy miracle from God. And you know, I got to study with this 40-year-old man and even older, and it was just completely crazy. And I started getting a lot of knowledge, but I still did not have the most important revelation in my life: who is Jesus Christ? You know, I've been really trying to go back and see what were the certain steps that God used to conquer my heart, and I just noticed that it was kind of unexpected, you know? I wasn't really thinking about it, and one day to another, I just find myself with this passion for God. I don't know where it came from, but I know that the minute I found out it was there, everything in my life changed. One day the pastor's preaching, and he tells this beautiful message about following Christ, and I knew it was directed at me. I embraced it with my whole heart, and I decided this time I will go all the way with Christ. And so everything in my life started changing. I stopped filling myself up so much with movies, with parties, and I started getting myself filled up with the Word and with Jesus, specifically with Jesus. I discovered the power of prayer, and I remember that shortly after I decided I am gonna get baptized. And yeah, I remember I didn't tell my parents I was gonna get baptized, but one day I always told my dad, oh, I need to be early for church, and I would actually arrive early to the baptism classes. And my dad one day asked me, well, why are you arriving so early? And I kind of didn't want to tell him, but he kind of pressured me, so I had to tell him I'm getting baptized. And I just remember that the heart of my dad was just so overwhelmed that he starts, you know, shedding tears. And it was finally when I understood that I had done something I had never done in my life. I had honored my father. And this was just so beautiful. And a couple of weeks later, I was saying, I will go all the way with Christ, but in front of a crowd of people. And as I'm giving this final speech in my baptism, before they submerged me in water, I started telling people what was the work of God in my life. And I discovered something that has really touched my heart since then. There is power in remembering. I don't know what God has done in your life. I don't know how many great times have you seen His provision, have you seen His love, but I want to tell you, God has been faithful in the past. You just need to remember. Let's start doing things so we don't forget. If God is being faithful now, try to write it somewhere, try taking pictures about it, but don't forget, because it's in those times of frustration that our mind sometimes just wanders, and it just gets confusing, you know? And when you're in this confusion, you can just go back and say, God has been faithful in the past, and in the Bible it says that God never changes. So if He has been faithful in your past, He will certainly be faithful in your present, and He will certainly be faithful in your future. So remember, and there's a ton of examples in the Bible about how we're supposed to remember. In fact, God, every time you look at a rainbow, think this is God's sign of remembrance, that He will never wipe out again His people. And what would be the world without the Bible? The Bible is a list of things that you should never forget. So that revelation which God has given you, grasp it, make it yours, and never, ever, ever forget it. Don't allow yourself to forget the wonderful things that God has done in your life. Jesus Christ is present there in your life, and He really, really loves you.